Going for the Platinum Trophy in Metaphor ReFantazio was such a pain that it very nearly ruined the game for me entirely, and actually highlighted quite how major some of its biggest flaws are, as well as the rest of Atlus's RPGs. So if you're thinking about going for the Platinum Trophy for Metaphor, or Persona, or Shin Megami Tensei, all of which I've done personally, stick around because this video might make you think twice about it. Of course, this is my own personal experience and I will be discussing the full game at length, so consider this a spoiler warning for Metaphor if you've yet to finish it. And you might find you feel differently about it, so if you do, I encourage you to comment below about your own experience. And subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed this type of content, because I'd like to make a lot more like it on JRPGs and other challenging games. When I first started Metaphor ReFantazio, I did so with some level of trepidation, as even though we've got the trophies for Persona 5 and Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, which are both longer than Metaphor, certainly in terms of the trophy hunting, I wasn't quite sure where Metaphor would land within my wheelhouse, as, in potentially a hot take here, I like SMT more than Persona. Persona is a wonderful game series, there's no two ways about that, and it's massively popular for good reason, but as I've personally gotten older, I've discovered that I take issue with games that tend to be 80% cutscene and 20% game, which is a very strange thing for a JRPG fan to say. And Persona is very much prone to doing this, and it also uses the calendar system, which for a completionist like me is an absolute nightmare. I find I end up stressing out playing games like Persona rather than being able to be relaxed and take them at my own pace through the amount you're able to miss in them. Whereas SMT's core franchise prides itself on how challenging a game it is rather than how character driven it is, and so when my friend Jared and I went through the 6 full playthroughs to get the Platinum Trophy for SMT 5 Vengeance, we still enjoyed it from start to finish. So when it came to Metaphor, I had no idea how I was going to feel about it, given that it takes elements from both of the other two, using the calendar system I hate from Persona, but the combat and press turn systems I love from SMT, as well as having a job system, which is always something I enjoy, given how much I like classic JRPGs like Final Fantasy V. Well, to give you a quick rundown on how I felt about the game for the most part, I loved it. Luis and Heismei very quickly became favourite characters of mine. I really enjoyed the politically driven story, at least until it wasn't so political anymore and just became another anime Chosen One arc, and I thought the evolution of the press turn system was delightfully done. The calendar system is still not my favourite thing in the world, but at least I didn't have to make perfect decisions during social links to get those leveled up. However, some of the trophies in Metaphor bothered me, not because they were difficult per se, but because they may as well have required a guide to get them, which I don't love. The gold beetles required for one of the trophies and some pretty good endgame equipment are in very obscure places, many of which are missable, including right at the start of the game. And then trying to optimise getting all of the social links along with finishing all quests, which is another trophy needed for the plat, getting all social stats to max, and making all of the recipes, all of which chip away at your time in the calendar system. I just found stressful. Luckily, most of these can be done in New Game Plus if needed, so none of these are the offender that nearly ruined the game for me. That's still to come. By the time I'd finished the game, I had a few trophies left and an experienced opinion on Metaphor as a whole. I had the Debate Me trophy for winning a debate against all candidates, something I ended up looking at a guide for in New Game Plus because the game doesn't indicate when one was available to me, and therefore I missed a couple, the Clear All Quest trophy I spoke about earlier, and the Superboss trophy, closing the book. I did also have the Joesephyr trophy left over, which at first glance doesn't look too bad, but when you get into the game you realise how little you actually use the sword surfing, because you kind of just fast travel everywhere, and you need to use the sword surfing a lot for this trophy to pop, so I ended up just running up and down the stairs in Alterbury Heights for nearly an hour while listening to a podcast. Not a problematic trophy by any means, just a bit weird given how de-incentivized you are to use this mechanic. Some of the grindier trophies, like Archetype Hero, mastering all the archetypes with the protagonist, and Summon Mask Time, obtained by creating all of the summoning vessels and masks for Juna and Joesephyr, I never found too bad because the final dungeon actually makes this surprisingly easy. Of course, missing 2 of the quests quite early on as well meant that not only did I need to do a full New Game Plus run thanks to the Super Boss, but I also needed to pay attention to what I was doing the whole time a second time, lest I miss a quest again and have to go through a third. To touch on the story of Metaphor, as I say, I liked it for the most part, but Atlus's storytelling in Metaphor mirrors Persona a little too much, in that the majority of party members get pushed to the sidelines in the story pretty quickly after they're introduced, an action I've come to call getting frayed, a term that'll hit home hard for fellow Final Fantasy IX fans, I'm sure. I also think that the story peaks at the failed assassination, and stays strong, at least until fighting Rella in the Mage Academy. I'm not a massive fan of the protagonist's role in the game by the end. It all feels very Deus Ex Machina-y, and I'm sure many of us totally saw it coming, especially on discovery of the protagonist's canonical name, Will, and the tenuous links between the real world and the world of Metaphor all kind of feel like a misdirect by the end of the game, making you think it all means more than it actually does. And Moore's identity really felt weird and unnecessary at the end too. But I digress, because it was playing New Game Plus that truly highlighted the issues I had with Metaphor, and the trophy I state as the one that nearly ruined the game for me is the Superboss trophy closing the book. This trophy wants you to defeat a Superboss accessed through Academia, which normally I love the idea of, but the problem is that your social links and level are reset on New Game Plus, so in order to tackle the Superboss, you'd want the Royal Archetypes obtained at the end of the game. So even if I didn't have to do all the quests again, I'd still have to get to the end of the whole game again just to be able to tackle this one boss. On New Game Plus, I skipped all the cutscenes after all I'd just seen them, and it still took me 25 hours to get to the point where I'd be able to go for the Apocalypse Dragon. And a lot of that time was spent micromanaging to get the social links all done again. It was during this second playthrough that I discovered a different issue with Metaphor, the dungeon design. I'm sorry to all the ride or dies out there, I think Metaphor is a wonderful game, but the design of its dungeons are abysmal. Almost all of them look the same, drab, brown caves that are bizarrely easy to get lost in despite having a minimap, and having to scour the walls for holes to be able to crawl through is not fun to me. And of course, if you want to finish all the quests, you have to do this, because Neurus' social link requires finding hidden artifacts all over the place. So I finally get back to a place where I'm ready to tackle the Red Scale Dragon, and I've spoken already about how much I love the combat in Metaphor. It's challenging, it's fun, the characters all have their own identities and the royal archetypes, but you still have player agency to kick them out. It ticks all of the boxes for me for good JRPG combat, and I really liked the dragon quest at the end of the game that forced you to think outside the box. But the problem was, by the time I'd gotten to the Red Scale Dragon, it was a joke. It didn't feel like an almighty clash as it should have done, but instead petered out with a whimper. So I'd gone through all of that for the second time, and I didn't get my great climax to finish the game and get my plat. No fun, man. I suppose I should have expected this, given that Persona and SMT pull things like this out a lot, but it still didn't feel great. So yeah, I have my platinum trophy for Metaphor ReFantazio, and I think the game is solid. It certainly has its high points and some memorable characters, but I don't think it deserved Game of the Year or anything, because I think it has low points too. I like to think of games like Metaphor and JRPGs generally as a complete package rather than just a story, because ultimately, what's stopping me from just watching it on YouTube? I don't think the trophy hunt improved my outlook on the game either, so much as soured it. And that isn't to say all trophy hunts do this. As a matter of fact, the opposite is often true for me. Games like Dead Space, Resident Evil 2, Elden Ring, Balatro, and heck, even Final Fantasy VII Rebirth got a lot of longevity from me due to their trophy list, and Metaphor just wasn't one of those games. I think what makes it worst with Atlus's RPGs in particular is that it's not uncommon for the super bosses to only be available on New Game Plus and expect the player to play through an entire second time to access, regardless of whether they're trophy hunting or not. If it were me, I'd make the boss at least accessible from the end of the first playthrough, and if it requires a second playthrough to get the strength to beat it, so be it, but I'm sure players will find ways to come out on top the first time, and that's the joy of it. I certainly didn't have a bad experience with Metaphor though, and it's a plat I'm proud to have, but now I'd like to ask you, have you ever had a platinum trophy either ruin a game for you or rejuvenate it entirely? Because I've certainly had experiences on both counts, and I'd love to know your experiences too. Comment below. And with that, that is my experience with the Platinum Trophy for Metaphor ReFantazio. I have over 200 Platinum Trophies, including almost every Final Fantasy and a bunch of extremely time-consuming JRPGs, so let me know if there's a game you'd like me to focus on next. And if you want to see all of our collection, check me out on psnprofiles.com, and as I said at the start of this video, if you've enjoyed this, please do consider subscribing or finding me on Twitch, TikTok, I've been doing a lot with Pokemon TCG Pocket over on there, Twitter or X or whatever one you call it, and all sorts of other places. And if you'd like to support the channel further, consider checking out my Patreon as well. But until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.